So many people are fighting on the battlefield after finally making it that far. Their victory is assured only if they manage to win against their formidable enemy. A group of fighters are battling fiercely, but one of them, just as he is about to speak, is suddenly taken down by the enemy's attack, leaving him severely injured. Shocked and horrified, the man collapses to the ground, realizing it is a fatal blow. The black-haired man looks at himself in a broken mirror, filled with regret that, in the end, he will die without ever having been able to accomplish anything. One day, an unknown threat appeared out of nowhere and destroyed an entire continent. That enemy became known as the archenemy of all mankind, the Liquidator. To face such a terrifying foe, a group was formed to protect humanity. Among its legendary members was Brian Miller, the world-protecting shield, a man who survived a giant meteorite strike without a single scratch. Then there was Bella Albright, the great sage, said to possess power equal to an entire division. Jacob Bloomfield, the divine archer, was famed for taking down a high-level dragon with a single shot. Amy White, the sword saint, became known as the strongest swordswoman to ever exist. Alongside these heroes were other members called the support unit, and the black-haired man, Gray Lee, was one of them. In reality, they were merely treated as sacrificial pawns. Gray Lee was nothing more than a foot soldier. After being defeated and collapsing to the ground, he could only think about the true heroes battling against the Liquidator, believing they existed on a level far beyond his own. Lee had known that graduates of the World Union Academy were exceptional, but he never realized the difference between them and the ordinary foot soldiers would be so vast. The heroes continued to hold their ground against the Liquidator, relentlessly attacking. Watching from the ground, Lee began to wonder if it even mattered whether the support units were present at all. Then, the Sword Saint Amy leapt into the air, launching her strongest attack at the Liquidator. Meanwhile, Lee cried his heart out, mourning the hard work and sacrifice of his team. Amy's strike barely managed to leave a small scratch on the Liquidator's body. The Liquidator was shocked to see he had actually been injured, even slightly. Annoyed, he decided to stop holding back and, with a single overwhelming blow, killed all of the heroes instantly. Lee, witnessing this horrifying scene, was stunned beyond words. The Liquidator casually admitted that he had only been toying with them all this time. Lee closed his eyes, realizing they had never stood a chance against the Liquidator from the very beginning. He lay on the ground, still breathing despite getting seriously injured for so long. He suddenly heard a voice saying he had been found. In an instant, he felt his consciousness pulled away, and when he opened his eyes again, he was in another dimension. Lee looked around at the barren landscape, wondering if this was the afterlife. He turned to see a being seated on a throne and asked who he was. The being revealed that Lee was not dead, explaining that his body's physical wounds had already healed. Suddenly, glowing yellow windows appeared before Lee, displaying the state of his body, fully restored, with dark fog erupting from it. Confused, Lee asked if the being had healed him. The being denied it, saying the healing came from Lee's own power. Even though Lee did not understand, the being admitted he also could not properly explain it, since even he was unable to fully analyze Lee's power. But he guaranteed that Lee's power was greater than the Liquidator's, if Lee could learn to control it. Hearing this, Lee asked if that meant he could defeat the Liquidator. The being cautiously replied that it was uncertain and warned Lee not to have false hope, though he did believe that eliminating the Liquidator was necessary. Then, the being walked up to Lee, landed a strike, and declared that Lee could return. A brilliant blue light erupted from Lee's back, and a glowing magic circle appeared. The being declared that he would grant his powers to Lee. The light intensified, and Lee was transported back to the battlefield. He stood tall, picked up a sword, and watched as it turned black in his hands. The being's voice echoed, explaining that this was Lee's own power, though the being's essence could not be seen with the naked eye. Understanding this, Lee charged forward. The Liquidator noticed him but failed to block his sudden attack. Staggered, the Liquidator was shocked that someone strong enough to harm him was still alive. Lee saw that his attack had injured the Liquidator, so he readied his stance again and declared that his powers were stronger than the Liquidator's. Enraged, the Liquidator roared that Lee should not underestimate him and takes down Lee with a single devastating strike. Lee gasped in horror as he was defeated with a single blow. The Liquidator smirked, admitting he would at least commend Li for forcing him to use his full strength. But then, an overwhelming killing intent washed over him. Li's body transformed into a swirling mass of red and black mana, forming an enormous sword of pure energy. The Liquidator's eyes widened as he realized Li had somehow survived even he used his full power. In desperation, the Liquidator cast a powerful shield spell, demanding to know if Li was truly human. Li, filled with determination, charged at the Liquidator with all his might, shattering the shield and taking down the Liquidator. In return, Li asked the same question, the one that now haunted the battlefield. Was the Liquidator truly human? Li skids to a halt and appears in front of the Liquidator, demanding to know how he is still alive. Li admits that his opponent's strength is no small feat. The Liquidator exhales heavily, and Li declares that he will keep striking until the enemy is dead. In the next instant, Li swings his sword with full strength, striking the Liquidator. The Liquidator screams in agony, groaning in pain while calling Li a monster. The Liquidator activates a move that heals his body, and his wings emit a colorful light as he raises his hands to form a strange pattern. Suddenly, a full moon appears in the night sky. The Liquidator declares that his time has come to an end. Li looks up, notices the night sky, and smirks. In a flash, he appears behind the Liquidator, holding his sword tightly, and strikes at his neck. However, the Liquidator shields his neck with his power, leaving Li stunned. The Liquidator calls Li's efforts useless, explaining that under this night sky, nothing is strong enough to harm him. He orders Li to stop resisting and instead notice the stars above. Li startles as he gazes upward, his wide eyes shining with the light of the stars. As he continues watching, the stars shine even brighter. The Liquidator asks if he finds them beautiful. Suddenly, the light from the stars descends closer to the surface, and in an instant, a massive beam of light strikes Li. The Liquidator hovers above, watching the destruction unfold. As the light fades, a giant crater forms, and the Liquidator proclaims that Li could never revive after being turned to dust. But then, he sees a swirling blue energy appear before him. The swirling energy forms the shape of a clock, and the Liquidator tries to process what he is seeing. A voice speaks, declaring that the Liquidator has accumulated so much power that it is enough to send him back. The Liquidator is stunned, instantly recognizing Kronos. Kronos asks if the Liquidator hears him, addressing him as the one who wields great power. He tells the Liquidator that he will now send him back to the past by using his full strength. The Liquidator shouts Kronos' name and curses him, but Kronos calmly declares that this is all he can do. The blue energy formation glows brightly, releasing several threads of energy as it counts down from 12 to 1. With each count, Kronos entrusts the fate of the world to Li's hands. Li slowly opens his eyes, finding himself lying in a field of grass. The leaves drift in the breeze as he sits up, confused about his surroundings. After a brief pause, he realizes he is back in his hometown, Renadu Village. He is stunned, recalling that this village was destroyed 15 years ago. Shock fills him as he remembers Kronos sending him back to the past. He whispers in disbelief that it actually happened. Suddenly, he feels a sharp pain in his arm. His wounded arm trembles, reminding him that at this point in time, he had already received this injury from Belder and his group. Gritting his teeth, Li mutters that he won't allow himself to be hurt by people like them again. But he quickly remembers how strong they were, realizing he wouldn't be able to defeat them yet. Sighing, he admits that defeating the Liquidator had been impossible. He walks away, telling himself he will deal with those people once he becomes stronger, since he doesn't want to be hurt again. Not long after, Li finds himself face to face with the very people he wanted to avoid. Belder stands before him, smirking with a sword in hand. Surrounded by his 3 friends, Belder says he had been searching for Li and accuses him of causing too much trouble. Li grows nervous as Belder tosses a sword at his feet, ordering him to pick it up. Li looks down in confusion. Belder sneers, telling him not to act foolish and to prepare for a mock battle. Li apologizes, explaining that he cannot participate since his arm is still injured, but he thanks them for the invitation and says he won't be able to fight until he recovers. Belder and his friends smirk at his words. Belder tells him not to worry, pointing out that the blade is dull and therefore safe. Li argues that even a dull blade is still a chunk of iron, and just as he is about to add another point, Belder cuts him off, ordering him to shut his mouth and slamming his own sword into the ground. Belder insists there is no choice. If Lee doesn't like using a sword, then he should fight barehanded. Without warning, Belder charges at Lee with his sword. Lee is shocked, realizing Belder wants to beat him while he is weaponless, and wonders what kind of mock battle this is supposed to be. His mind flashes back to his past, remembering how a military doctor once told him his inability to improve at swordsmanship came from the injury he had sustained as a child. Thinking about it now, Lee wonders if this was the very moment where his life as a failure truly began. Belder swings his sword, but Lee narrowly dodges, surprising himself. He questions whether Belder's attacks had always been this slow. Belder strikes again, and Lee ducks to avoid it. Blow after blow comes at him, yet Lee continues to dodge with ease. Frustrated, Belder demands to know why he cannot land a single hit. Lee realizes in that moment that he has grown faster. One of Belder's friends whispers in disbelief, saying that from the look of his movements, Lee seems like an entirely different person. Lee edges toward the discarded sword, thinking to himself that even though he does not have the same body he once had, he still retains all the memories of battles he fought. Just as Belder raises his sword overhead to strike down, Lee counters by picking up the sword and blocking the attack. Belder groans in pain as his arm shakes from the force, while Lee wonders whether it is even worth fighting against someone so inexperienced. But then, he thinks about how he suffered because of people like Belder, how their bullying left him in pain, powerless to fight back. With determination, Lee steps forward and strikes Belder with a powerful blow, sending the sword flying from his hand. Belder curses as he watches his weapon clatter to the ground. Lee is stunned at the sight and thinks that Belder is even worse than a beginner. He tells Belder that he probably never trained enough to learn how to withstand the force of a sword strike. Belder stares in shock as Lee continues, warning him to take things more seriously, because it was people like them who once taught him the cruel lesson that it is safe to beat someone as long as the blade is dull. Lee strikes Belder with his sword, leaving a wound on him, and for a moment Belder is unable to process what just happened. After a pause, he screams in pain. Lee gasps and questions to himself whether the blade was truly dull. When he examines the sword, he realizes that it indeed is dull. He thinks to himself that if the sword had been sharp, Belder might have died. Turning his head toward Belder, Lee strikes him in the face with the flat side of the sword, and the force of the blow sends him backward, screaming in pain. Lee approaches Belder, who lies on the ground, and asks what is making him scream so loudly. Belder trembles in fear as Lee steps closer, reminding him that he was the one who said a dull sword was harmless. Desperate, Belder shouts for his friends to attack Lee. One friend hesitates, nervously saying that Lee has become stronger, while another suggests that if they all go together and attack from behind, they might succeed. The three surround Lee from different directions. Lee calmly asks if they want a second round. Belder orders his friends to kill him, and they all charge at once. Lee mutters that he had planned to ignore this. The forest soon echoes with the clash of swords. After some time, Belder and his three friends sit on the ground with swollen faces, clearly defeated. Lee is stunned, thinking how fearful he used to be of these very people in the past. He asks if they are from the Serious Swordsmanship Dojo. Belder gives a half-hearted confirmation, while another friend admits that after they thought they had grown stronger, they stopped going to the dojo. Lee wonders if this is what strong enough really means. He decides he shouldn't overestimate the dojo, though he admits it could still have its uses. With a sigh, he tells them to take him to the dojo, since access is by referral only. Belder nervously asks him to find someone else, explaining that if his master finds out he lost, he can't imagine what she would say. Lee swings his sword and asks Belder if he is still interested in what they were doing earlier. Terrified, Belder bolts in the opposite direction, shouting that he will take him, pointing the way to the dojo as he runs. His friends gasp, complaining that Belder is leaving them behind. As they enter town, Belder asks Lee why he wants to join a dojo. Lee replies that a dojo has recommendation slots for the academy, doesn't it? Belder nervously admits he's heard something like that, and Lee tells him that's exactly why he wants to go. The long-haired friend nervously says that Lee is already strong enough without the academy. Lee remarks how wonderful it would be if enough really meant enough. He reflects that even the world's strongest warriors stood no chance against the Liquidator. He remembers that even after gaining his mysterious power, he still could not harm the Liquidator. He wonders how much stronger he must become to kill such a being. He recalls that for just a moment back then, he managed to control his dark power while focusing on the swordsmanship taught by the Sword Saint. He clenches his fist, realizing that if he had spent more time learning swordsmanship like the Sword Saint, he could have won. That must be why Kronos sent him back. Later, at the dojo, Belder's master holds a training sword as she listens to what Belder and his friends confessed, that they picked a fight with a civilian while using the swordsmanship she had taught them and ended up losing. She clicks her tongue, glaring at her students. She is none other than the swordsmanship dojo instructor, Saria. Belder tries to excuse himself, claiming it was just a mock battle. Saria strikes him forcefully with her training sword, sending him flying into the wall with a loud crash. His 3 friends tremble in fear. Saria scolds Belder, asking who told him to make excuses. If that was a mock battle, she says, then what just happened also counts as one. She points her training sword at Belder's face and tells the entire group to leave and never return, adding that they can no longer call themselves her students. They answer in unison and leave as she commanded. Saria then turns back, sits in front of Lee, and apologizes for the behavior of her former students. Lee, sitting across from her, says it is nothing to worry about. Saria thanks him sincerely, bowing her head. She then says she heard he wishes to be recommended to the academy, and Lee confirms. Saria picks up a training sword and says that as an apology for the trouble caused by her students, she would love to write a recommendation letter, but first, she needs to confirm his abilities. She hands him the sword. Lee nods in acknowledgement. Saria offers him the first move, telling him to come forward whenever he is ready. In the next moment, Lee charges at her with full strength. Their swords clash loudly. Saria notes to herself that Lee fights in a highly practical way, as though he has already been through countless battles. As their blades cross, Lee crouches and presses forward again. Saria realizes that Belder and his group never stood a chance against him. She observes that his style looks self-taught, but at times resembles techniques from the academy. She wonders if he learned from someone, though she admits that while his swordplay is still rough, his skill is undeniable. She smiles to herself, thinking that Lee is a hidden gem. She skids forward to finish the duel, though she feels regret that it might soon end. Lee pushes forward as well, their swords colliding again. Lee keeps up with her pace without flinching, and Saria wonders how he is able to keep up with her at all. She had only intended to test him, but now she is fighting at her full strength. For the first time, she admits to herself that she feels fear of him. Their duel suddenly fills with dark energy. One of Lee's eyes glows with flames as he unleashes a powerful dark strike. Saria barely manages to dodge, skidding backward, stunned that she just witnessed such a wild blow. Lee slows down for a brief moment, giving her an opening. She rushes forward, declaring that this fight will end here. But as she strikes, something strange happens. Her sword suddenly shatters in her hands. Saria doesn't understand what just happened as the upper half of her sword falls to the ground. Lee realizes that the power he just felt is the same one from his past, and he comes to understand that he now possesses that power as well. Suddenly, a sharp pain rushes through his body, forcing him to his knees as he screams in agony. Saria worriedly asks if he is all right, while Lee continues to tremble in pain. He then realizes that his body cannot handle the power, gasping as the pain continues. Slowly, he pushes himself back to his feet, still trembling. He mutters that he is fine, though he thinks to himself that he cannot even stand steadily. Inwardly, he decides that he must not use this power carelessly. Looking at Saria, he debates whether to tell her, but when he sees the confusion in her eyes, he decides against it. He knows she wouldn't believe him, and besides, he cannot even control this power yet. Instead, he simply says that he went a little overboard. She remains silent. The next moment, Saria looks at her broken sword, thinking logically that it should have been impossible for him to break her weapon with a dull wooden blade. She is certain that he is aware of this as well. Lee notices her staring and nervously asks if something is wrong. Saria understands that he doesn't want to talk about it. She then discards the broken sword and asks if he still wants a recommendation to the academy. Lee confirms, saying he has heard that she can write one. After confirming, Saria says she can indeed write a recommendation letter to the kingdom's finest institute, the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship, but she quickly adds that she doesn't recommend he go there. She firmly states that he is not suited for such a place. Lee remains silent, inwardly thinking that he expected this, since he lacks the necessary strength. He admits to himself that he can't do much, except at the last moment. Saria then suggests he aim for the World Union Academy. Lee is stunned upon hearing this. She explains that he should go to the world's finest institute instead of the kingdom's finest. Lee cannot process her words. He remembers that the World Union Academy is the same place from which the Sword Saint and other legendary figures had graduated. Shocked, he shouts, asking how someone like him could ever be accepted there. Saria casually denies the possibility, saying it is impossible. She points out that he must have already noticed his body is not suited to be a swordsman. He might be able to fake his way into the Royal Academy with his skills, but that won't work for the World Union Academy. She asks him directly how he learned such skill with such a weak body. Lee scratches his head, unable to answer. In his thoughts, he admits that every single person from the World Union Academy is a genius, and with his current body, he cannot even stand beside them. Saria steps closer and asks why he is giving up so easily, reminding him that the entrance exam is still 9 months away. Lee nervously says that 9 months is far too short. Saria agrees it isn't much time, but she tells him to trust her. She then asks if he is ready to suffer for the next 9 months. Lee admits he doesn't want to suffer, but he clenches his hand and says he will do it anyway. With determination, he asks Saria to watch over him during this time. Saria grins, praising his answer. Then, her expression grows serious, leaving Lee confused. She cracks her knuckles and announces that his hell has begun. From that day forward, Lee's intense training starts. Day after day, he lifts weights, eats massive amounts of food, drinks a murky purple soup he hesitates to swallow, trains relentlessly with Saria, duels with her, and runs endlessly. After 8 months, Lee's body has become muscular. Saria proudly tells him that he has grown and confidently says she has nothing more to teach him, encouraging him to step forward with confidence. Lee is confused, pointing out that there is still 1 month left until the exam. Saria advises him to arrive early at the exam site, since a place like that will be new to him. She gives him money and a month's worth of food. Lee refuses, arguing that arriving a month early is unnecessary. He suspects she is trying to chase him away. Saria exhales and tells him he is just overthinking. Lee then says he has heard rumors about an ogre's nest near the village. Saria startles, but admits plainly that there is indeed a nest. She smiles, brushing it off, and says it's not their responsibility to act. She adds that they don't need to worry, as the royal capital will send reinforcements. She tells Lee to focus only on getting to the exam site. But Lee looks at her and thinks she is lying. He remembers that no help will come, and that before the village is destroyed, his master will lose her life fighting the ogre alone. He nods and simply says he understands. He thanks Saria and tells her he will be heading out. She pauses, then smiles and says she will pray for his success at the exam. Later that night, Saria goes into a forest. She examines a trail, feeling nervous, and mutters that according to the scout's report, it should be this way. Suddenly, a voice asks where she is going. Startled, she looks up and sees Lee sitting on a tree branch, gazing down at her. Lee looks at her calmly and calls out, "Master." In surprise, Saria calls out Lee's name. She asks why he is here and questions whether he should already be heading toward the academy. Lee responds that he should be the one asking that, then jumps down to the ground. He continues, saying that he heard her mention the royal capital would send help to deal with the ogre nests. Saria explains that the guards were unable to come due to an urgent matter, so she decided to handle it herself. She smiles, confidently saying that she is enough to counter the threat. Based on the scout's report, she knows the strength of the nest. She explains that the nest's boss is an elite ogre, and overall, there are approximately 40 to 50 monsters. With a sigh, she admits that fighting that many at once will be complicated. Lee thinks to himself that an elite ogre alone is not particularly dangerous, but the true threat lies in its intelligence and leadership. Fighting them all at once would be like walking to one's own death. He knows something for certain. His master will die if she faces them alone, and the village will be destroyed afterward, because he has already witnessed this in his past life. Lee firmly asks Saria to take him with her. Saria shakes her head, reminding him that she already said she would go alone. Lee tries to persuade her, insisting that he wants real combat experience and wonders aloud if he would only get in her way. Saria smirks and admits that he knows he won't get in her way. After all, she can't even defeat him in a mock battle anymore. Still, placing her hand on her sword, She warns that in real combat, anything can happen, especially with an ogre's nest that appeared so suddenly. For something this dangerous, she says, it is better to wait until he gains more real combat experience. Lee then says plainly that if she really intends to go alone, then he has an idea. This catches Saria's attention. Lee steps forward with determination, declaring that he will fight her, beat her until she is completely knocked down, and then go to face the ogres himself. He raises his sword and points it directly at her. Saria stands with her own sword in hand. After a brief pause, she admits defeat and tells him she gives up. She asks only that he promise to come back alive no matter what. Lee lowers his sword and says he has already planned to survive. As they begin walking together toward the ogre's nest, Lee tells Saria not to die either. She nods in agreement. Eventually, they arrive at a mountainous area where the ogre's nests are located between the cliffs. From afar, Saria and Lee discuss the terrain, noting that it leaves no chance of retreat. The ogres must be very confident to build their nests here. Lee remarks that they themselves will also have no way out. Since they are facing intelligent monsters, he says, it is better to proceed with caution. Saria confirms she understands. As she observes the ogres, she notices that the boss is nowhere to be seen and assumes it must be inside its tent. She suggests thinning their numbers before the boss appears. She instructs Lee to take down the ogres one by one from one side, while she goes to the other. Lee nods in agreement. Moments later, both of them emerge, swords in hand, determined to face the enemy head-on. One ogre turns its head after noticing Saria, but in an instant she takes down the ogre with a single strike. Another ogre grows worried after seeing its comrade fall and signals the others to charge forward. A large group of ogres, weapons in hand, begin to rush forward in rage, growling heavily. On the other side, Lee is striking ogres with his sword. The monsters groan in pain as Lee's strikes land. Saria is also taking them down on her side, her sword striking swiftly. Lee keeps defeating the ogres with single strikes of his sword. After some time, Saria and Lee stand defeating almost all of the ogres. Saria praises Lee's performance and asks if this is truly his first real combat. Lee shrugs it off, saying they cannot let their guard down because this is only the beginning. Looking down, Lee grows worried. These ogres are so weak that his master Saria could have easily handled them alone. He turns his head toward the tent of the ogre leader, thinking about the possibility of something worse. Suddenly, glowing red eyes emerge from within the tent, terrifying him. He shouts to Saria to leave immediately. She quickly asks what is wrong, but Lee yells again for her to just go. Saria's eyes widen as she sees what lies ahead. In the very next moment, both of them start running back, Saria agreeing with Lee's warning. But as they flee, Lee sees an ogre leap into the air and land in front of them, blocking their way. The ground cracks from the force of its weight. Breathing heavily, Saria watches the monster and mutters that it is an honor for the boss itself to appear before them. But Lee shouts that it is not the boss. Before he can explain about the true leader, an earth-shaking roar erupts. An ogre bellows with its full strength, and many more respond in unison. The roar is so powerful that Saria covers her ears against the deafening sound. The ogres growl, their faces twisted with vicious expressions. Sweat runs down Saria's face as she trembles and asks what they are witnessing. She admits that this is far stronger than an elite ogre. Lee tells her that it is the ogre general, the real boss of the nest. Now, Lee and Saria stand trapped between the elite ogre and the forces of the ogre general. Saria shouts in disbelief, saying they are not capable of fighting such a monster. Frustrated, she turns toward the elite ogre, deciding that their only chance is to kill it quickly and escape. She charges forward, exchanging furious strikes with the elite ogre. With her keen gaze and swift movements, she lands a blow, wounding it. And for a moment she believes she has managed to injure it, but her eyes widen as she watches the wound heal almost instantly. Meanwhile, Lee, still taking down other ogres, shouts that it is useless to fight them. The roar of the ogre general boosts their strength and grants them incredible healing power. Saria, still locked in combat with the elite ogre, shouts back that this explains why all the ogres suddenly became stronger. She can feel that she is unable even to kill a single one now. Lee takes down another ogre, breathing heavily. He calls out to Saria, asking her to support him from behind. He tells her she doesn't need to kill them. He only needs her to buy him some time. Saria turns her head and yells back, demanding to know what he is planning. With determination, Lee replies that there is only one way to escape this situation. They must defeat the ogre general. Lee strikes at an ogre with full force, admitting inwardly that he feels irritated when they try to flank him. He dodges the attacks of the ogres successfully. One ogre roars as it charges at him, and Lee counters, thinking he only needs to focus on killing every ogre in front of him. But as his sword clashes against the ogre's weapon, his blade shatters into pieces. Staring at his broken sword, Lee realizes even his weapon could not withstand a strengthened ogre. The ogre attacks again, but Lee manages to dodge by leaping back. Drawing his other sword, he thinks it was a good decision to bring a spare, but worries this one won't last long either. Saria quickly throws him her spare sword, and Lee grabs it with gratitude, thanking her. Leaning down, Lee thinks that even though he now holds two swords, they still aren't enough to kill every ogre. He decides to save one blade for the ogre general and use the other against the remaining ogres, placing one sword back in its scabbard. He takes down most of the ogres, pushing forward toward the ogre general. Along the way, one ogre's blade scratches his face, leaving a wound. Lee retaliates instantly, taking down the ogre. Clicking his tongue, he runs forward with determination. He takes down every ogre in his path. The skull-shaped eyes on the ogre general's axe begin to glow, and the monster unleashes a deafening roar. Lee's eyes widen in fear as the roar strengthens the ogres further. All around, they growl with fury. They charge with even greater power, forcing Lee to barely hold his ground. He complains aloud that the ogre general has already seen through his plan. The ogre general roars again, and all its minions rush toward Lee. He mutters that their intelligence is impressive. Clashing blades with another ogre, Lee sees an opening and manages to land a strike before pressing forward. More and more ogres rush at him, but he continues to carve his way through them. He thinks he doesn't have time to fight them all, but suddenly, one ogre grabs him tightly while another raises its axe to strike. The blow comes down, but instead of hitting Lee, it lands on the ogre holding him. Shocked, Lee realizes they are sacrificing themselves to wear down his weapon. Suddenly, he looks up and sees an ogre preparing to crush him with a massive punch. He tries to block with the flat of his sword, but the strike lands, sending him flying with explosive force. Lee's body trembles in pain as he struggles to sit up with his broken sword in hand. He realizes he has only one last sword left and wonders how he could possibly defeat both the ogre general and the horde with a single blade. From his past life experience, he knows he cannot win. Still, he clenches the weapon and shouts for Saria to escape while the enemies focus on him. But Saria only smiles and apologizes, saying she can't leave because she is still locked in combat with the elite ogre. Dodging attacks, Lee yells back, asking if she has chosen to die in vain. He assures her he will also retreat if she runs, but Saria reveals the truth. She can't run. Looking down, she shows him her injured leg. Lee freezes in despair, realizing he has no other options. Yet he continues to fight with his dull sword. He thinks about how he was sent back in time to defeat the liquidator, but now it all seems like it will end too soon. His last blade shatters as well, leaving him standing before the ogres with nothing but a broken sword. Clutching the broken weapon, Lee tells himself it isn't over yet. He begins to recall the sensation of the power he once used. If he can control that dark power, he could wipe out every enemy before him. Closing his eyes, he concentrates, holding the broken sword outward. In the next moment, he awakens his dark power and unleashes it in a strike that takes down a group of ogres standing before him. Smoke spreads across the battlefield as Lee stands unmoving, weapon still in hand. Saria, worried, calls out his name. When Lee turns his head toward her, his face is covered with a dark mana. But he smiles and tells her he is fine. Then, surging forward, he taking down every ogre in his path and ultimately striking down the ogre general's massive axe. The ogre general gasps in shock at Lee's sudden appearance. Behind him, Saria also struggles to process what just happened. The elite ogre charges at her, but she counters skillfully, dismissing the attack as weak. With a sharp glare, she declares that it gave her trouble long enough, then strike the ogre down with ease. She admits that without the ogre general empowering it, the elite ogre is nothing. After a grueling battle, Lee and Saria finally stand victorious among the fallen. Lee pants heavily, muttering that they somehow managed. Saria slides her sword back into its scabbard. Lee apologizes for breaking her blade, but she brushes it off, saying it is fine. He saved her life. When Lee hands back the broken weapon, Saria starts to ask him about his last attacks. But before she can finish, Lee collapses to the ground with panicked. Saria shouts his name. Lee wonders aloud where he is, finding himself standing before a huge door. He stares at it, questioning its presence. The door is covered in chains, and suddenly, dark flames begin to emerge from it. Startled, Lee tries to remember, then realizes those flames resemble his own dark power. The flames spread further, filling the air with an ominous presence. Lee nervously wonders aloud if opening the door would grant him that power. He gulps and starts to walk toward it. Suddenly, a massive dark skeleton appears behind him. It grabs him with its enormous hand, holding him back and stopping him from reaching the door. Struggling, Lee coughs violently while clutching his chest. A chilling thought strikes him. If he opens the door in his current condition, he will die. Sweat pours down his face, his eyes blur with tears. Then, a voice echoes, telling him he has made a wise decision. He snaps his eyes open instantly, filled with fear, breathing heavily as he realizes he is lying in a bed. Saria calls out his name loudly upon seeing him awake, standing beside him with her arm in a cast. Lee stutters, demanding to know where he is. Saria explains that he is in the village infirmary and that he has been unconscious for the last 5 days. She admits she had been worried he might never wake up again. Lee rests his hand on his head, repeating Saria's words about being unconscious for 5 days. He mutters that this time he pushed himself so far that his body couldn't handle it afterward. Saria quietly responds that those are not the right words to describe what he did that day. She quickly changes the subject, asking how he feels and if he can move. As Lee sits up, he notices his hands lack any strength. He thinks to himself that he can move them if he tries hard, but wonders if he will ever be able to hold a sword again. He spots dark bruises on his arm, but when Saria asks if his arm cannot move, he realizes she can't see the bruises. He tells her he cannot put any strength into his dominant arm. Worried, Saria explains that she expects his arm will take a long time to heal completely. After all, the bones in his right arm were shattered into pieces. Lee startles at the revelation but admits he doesn't feel any pain. Saria clears his confusion, explaining that they treated his arm with a powerful magic potion. Lee is shocked, stuttering as he asks if such a potion wouldn't be too expensive. Saria sits on a nearby bed, smiling, and assures him that the village chief gave it to them. Lee turns his head in confusion, asking why the chief would give such a rare potion to someone like him. Narrowing her eyes, Saria asks what he means and tells him that he has become the hero of the village. But Lee struggles to comprehend it. Suddenly, the door bursts open, and a man with a mustache calls out Lee's name loudly. Lee turns toward him, holding the potion in his hand, and stutters as he addresses him as chief. He thanks the chief for giving him the magical potion. The chief places his hand on his chest, telling Lee that it is they, the villagers, who are thankful to him. He explains that the threat was no ordinary monster, but the ogre general, a being so strong that even if all the forces from surrounding towns had gathered, they would not have been able to scratch it. And yet, such a monster had targeted their village. The chief grips Lee's hands tightly, saying that if he had not taken down the ogre general, the entire village would have been destroyed. He adds that if Lee and Saria had not been there, this infirmary, this magic potion, and even the villagers themselves would no longer exist. Lee is stunned to hear his words. Behind him, Saria smiles calmly. Lee stammers, saying the chief is exaggerating, but the chief replies firmly that he is not exaggerating at all. As Lee thinks about the chief's words, he recalls his past life, when this village was supposed to have been destroyed by the ogre's attack. The village chief leans closer and tells him that if he still does not realize the importance of what he has done, then he will be more than happy to make him understand by giving him even more details. The chief then mentions that he has heard Lee is going to take the entrance exam for the World Union Academy and asks if he heard correctly. An "oh" slips out of Lee's mouth, and he leans down. He suddenly realizes that he went to fight the ogres a week before the exam, and now that he has been unconscious for 5 days, only 2 days remain before it begins. He frowns as he thinks it through. The journey to the exam site takes 3 days on foot, though he could make it in 1 day with a horse. But he doesn't have the money for that. Without hesitation, Lee apologizes and asks the village chief to lend him a horse. The chief waves his hand as he walks away, saying he knew Lee would ask and had already prepared the finest horse in the village for him. He adds that with its help, Lee will reach the exam site in time. After the chief leaves, Saria smirks and tells Lee that if he hadn't woken up, the chief himself would have carried him to the exam site. Lee laughs softly, scratching his head as he tries to stand. He walks to the door and opens it, squinting against the light. Outside, he finds himself surrounded by villagers smiling warmly, holding posters to thank him and wish him success on his exam. One villager calls out their thanks, another wishes him luck, while others express their gratitude for saving their lives. A tall man approaches and hands Lee a pouch. Curious, Lee asks what is inside. The man explains that the entire village contributed, knowing how costly it is to apply to the World Union Academy. For a moment, Lee stands stunned, then breaks into a bright smile as he thanks everyone. Standing beside the horse, he turns to Saria and admits that if he fails the exam, it will be hard for him to return. Saria assures him not to worry. Smiling, she tells him she doubts that even a single candidate in the World Union Academy could defeat an ogre general. Still, Lee looks at his injured right arm with concern, but Saria reminds him that his left arm is perfectly fine. Lee grips with his left hand, testing its strength, and confirms it works, though doubt lingers in his mind. Saria closes her eyes and tells him it will be more than enough, adding that he won't even need to use his hidden power in the exam. Lee, holding the horse's reins, mutters that the entrance exam won't be easy to pass with only one arm. Saria reassures him again, saying the examiners of the World Union Academy are not so blind that they would fail to recognize his skill. Lee mounts the horse, and Saria, her voice filled with determination, tells him he will surely pass the exam. Lee thanks her, admitting that after hearing her encouragement, he cannot afford to fail. Turning his head toward the villagers, Lee starts riding off and thinks to himself. In his previous life, this village was destroyed, yet now it still exists. The world has already changed from what it once was, and with the power he holds, he can change its future as well. Calling out to the villagers, he tells them he will be going. After some time, he finally reaches his destination. Grateful, he thanks the villagers who accompanied him and helped him arrive on time. Looking ahead, he sees the Grand Institute of the World Union Academy, where countless people are arriving, some in carriages, all heading toward the same goal. At the exam site, countless candidates are gathered. An announcement begins, informing them that exam tickets will now be distributed and advising everyone to remain in the central area until the process is complete. Lee stands among the crowd as candidates murmur around him. Some discuss how only 20 people will pass the exam out of all those present. From behind, Lee overhears two candidates debating that the number of successful candidates varies every year. In some years, 50 people were selected, while in others, only one candidate was chosen. The announcer calls Professor Ariel forward to explain the procedure. Professor Ariel steps up, announces the beginning of ticket distribution, and instructs the candidates to take the paper that will appear before them. She snaps her fingers, filling the exam hall with golden light. Lee reaches out and takes the paper floating before him. His paper reveals his candidate number, 513, and beneath it, the word swordsmanship course. He looks around and notes that everyone else has their own papers too. Professor Ariel addresses the crowd, explaining that some candidates may find nothing written on their papers except their number and course. She assures them this happens every year. Smiling, she declares that the World Union Academy does not discriminate against anyone based on nationality, status, or anything else, not even their names. The only thing that matters is passing the exam. For those who succeed, their names will be asked, though anyone uncomfortable may provide a false name instead. Lee is stunned to see himself assigned to the swordsmanship course, especially since he left his sword back at the inn. He wonders about the academy system. Professor Ariel admits she assigned courses based on what she saw in each candidate, then asks them to raise their hands if she was wrong. One candidate mutters in disbelief that she couldn't possibly assign courses just by looking at them. Another argues it's impossible with so many candidates. Soon, the crowd begins speculating. Some believe the academy must have checked their backgrounds in advance, while others think she used some kind of mind-reading magic. Professor Ariel smiles, noting that since no one raised their hand, Everyone must be in the correct course. She then tells them she will announce exam timings and instructs everyone to check their tickets. Lee looks down at his paper and sees his exam time, the first day at 11 a.m. He frowns, worrying that he had hoped for more time to let his arm heal. Professor Ariel warns the group strictly. Candidates must arrive on time or they will be disqualified. This exam is practical and only held once. No rescheduling or personal requests will be entertained. Lee grips his right hand, thinking how it still has no strength. He can only hope it will heal, even a little by tomorrow. The next day arrives, and Lee feels frustrated. His arm hasn't improved at all, meaning he must take the exam in this state. An attendant approaches him, instructing him to wait at the arena entrance. Nervously, Lee nods, reminding himself to stay calm. He checks his left hand, confirming it works fine, and notes he can move his right arm to some extent. Facing the arena, he resolves to carefully observe the examiner's movements to find an opening. Inside, the examiner calls a candidate forward and asks him to make the first move. The candidate nods, then charges at full speed with his sword raised high, striking with all his strength. The attack creates a small blast, but when the smoke clears, the examiner stands untouched while the ground bears the damage. The candidate tries again with determination, swinging his sword, but the examiner effortlessly counters the strike. The candidate's confidence crumbles. In one swift motion, the examiner leans down, strikes with his own sword, and sends the candidate flying, his weapon knocked from his hands. The candidate crashes to the ground, his sword landing behind him. The examiner announces the conclusion of the match and instructs the candidate to retrieve his weapon and exit. Injured, the candidate nods and leaves. Watching, Lee forces a smile, admitting inwardly that he already feels defeated. Then the examiner calls, "Number 513. Lee responds, stepping into the arena. His thoughts swirl. He is about to face the same person who effortlessly defeated someone larger and stronger than him, all while he himself can only use one arm. The examiner offers Lee the first move. Lee accepts. Gripping his sword tightly, he acknowledges to himself that he stands no chance of winning, but still decides to give everything he has. Lee charges forward with all his strength, recalling Saria's words. A sword is not swung only with the arms. You channel the power from your entire body into your arms. Inwardly, he asks Saria if this is truly what she meant. He wonders if, since his right arm has no strength, he can gather power from the rest of his body instead. He swings with determination, but the examiner dodges. Lee grimaces, thinking he cannot fight properly this way. If wielding a sword without arm strength were easy, no one would waste time training their bodies. The examiner leans down to strike, but Lee is stunned. The examiner seems to move in slow motion. Lee manages to counter with his sword. He admits inwardly that the examiner's strength is immense, but his speed and technique do not surpass Saria's. Thinking deeply, Lee realizes that if he relies on the swordsmanship Saria taught him, he might be able to make up for his weakened arm. He charges forward again, delivering a flurry of strikes. The examiner struggles, barely able to manage the onslaught. Lee confirms in his head that the examiner is indeed slower than expected. He admits internally that the examiner is not as strong as he first thought. In that moment, he recalls Saria's words, "You will pass." Their swords cross again, sparks flying. The examiner struggles to hold his ground while Lee, drenched in sweat, thinks to himself that he just might really make it. The examiner strikes at Lee again and again, but Lee dodges while thinking that even though he has seen through the examiner's swordsmanship, he cannot break his form due to the power difference between them. As he attacks with his right hand, his arm trembles. He notices the examiner's movements starting to weaken. Though he admits it is risky to use that power, he recalls it while spotting the examiner leaving an opening. Smirking, Lee skids around the examiner and reaches his back. The examiner widens his eyes in shock, and Lee admits inwardly that no matter how great the power difference is, as long as he gets behind him, he can succeed. Just as Lee prepares to strike from behind, the announcer calls out for him to stop. Lee halts, wondering if the match is already over and questioning if it isn't too early. The announcer declares that the time limit of the exam has been reached and the result is a draw. Lee stands frozen, frowning, thinking he didn't make it. He loses his grip on the sword and leaves the arena, believing he gave his all. As he steps down the stairs, He thinks that since he could not defeat the examiner, things will become difficult for him. He decides to take the exam next year, hoping that by then his arm will be fully healed. Still, he thanks the examiner before leaving. 1 week later, at the World Union Academy, meeting room 53, a group of 6 people sit across from each other. An old man with glasses asks for their thoughts on the candidates now that the exams have ended. The brown-haired man sighs, feeling drained, and complains. The short-bearded man remarks that observing everyone together was insufficient and suggests dividing the workload next year for efficiency. The man with the long mustache argues that they cannot neglect talent just to make things easier for themselves. The old man with glasses clarifies that he is asking about their thoughts on the candidates, not the exam system, and reaches out his hand toward the documents. Beginning with the swordsmanship course, he asks who passed. The short-bearded man, while observing holographic screens of the candidates' performances, says that as always, those who defeated the examiner passed. The rest depend on how well they displayed their skills and performed during the 15-minute time limit. He then asks the other instructors for their thoughts. They discuss and agree that aside from those who defeated the examiner, candidates 5, 217, and 733 stood out. The brown-haired man concludes that even if those candidates join, they will not be able to keep up in class. The mustache man agrees and asks for other opinions, but everyone remains silent. The old man with glasses finally announces that they have chosen the successful candidates of the swordsmanship course. Someone then asks about candidate number 513. Professor Ariel also raises the question about him. The swordsmanship examiner frowns, while the gray-haired man wonders about 513, and the mustache man reviews Lee's match. He comments that Lee seemed like he was about to win, but relying on tricks will only make things difficult in the long run. He continues, saying Lee's technique was good but lacked strength, admitting he was outmatched from beginning to end. The old man with glasses asks for his final input, and the mustache man concludes that Lee is not good enough. Everyone agrees, while Professor Ariel silently notes that although they all watched his performance, none of them truly saw it. She remarks inwardly that if they are this blind, making them watch his match was a waste of time. The next day, all the candidates gather around the watchtower, Lee among them, holding his exam ticket. The announcer steps forward and declares that they will now announce the successful candidates for swordsmanship. He reveals that only 6 candidates have passed. Lee's nerves grow heavier. The announcer calls out the successful numbers: 5, 217, 432, 615, 753, and 925. As each is called, the candidate's ticket burns, confirming their success. Lee stands frozen in place as his number is not announced. The announcer instructs the successful candidates to cross the bridges and complete their enrollment before the day ends. Still clutching his ticket, Lee frowns, thinking he has failed. But then, the announcer begins to declare the Divine Eye special admission. Suddenly, he calls out candidate number 513. Lee's ticket bursts into blue flames, leaving him stunned. He can hardly believe it. He actually passed. The crowd murmurs in confusion. One candidate asks what the Divine Eye special admission is, while another notes they are doing it again this year. Still shocked, Lee thinks to himself that it is the first time he has ever heard of it. A candidate chuckles, saying it just means someone passed indirectly, while another criticizes the World Union Academy for damaging its reputation. Hearing this, Lee wonders if Saria had anything to do with it, though he was never told. Just then, an old man appears behind them, silencing the gossip. He explains that the Divine Eye Special Admission is an honorable category that has produced heroes for more than 100 years. One brown-haired candidate dismisses him, but another with blue hair mentions that only the Divine Eye candidates of the past were truly excellent. The candidates continue debating, saying that the current Divine Eye Special Admissions include Amy White, Bella Albright, Leek Mueller, and Jacob Bloomfield, all of whom are considered failures by every candidate. Lee, however, remembers that Amy White, Bella Albright, and Jacob Bloomfield were all part of the main force that fought the Liquidator in his past life. Shocked, he wonders if his name will now be listed alongside theirs. 30 minutes before the entrance ceremony, the students change into the Academy's standard uniforms and gather in the plaza in front of the main office. However, when they arrive, something feels strange. They are clearly standing before the main office, but the plaza itself is nowhere to be seen. Just then, A silver-haired professor appears and apologizes for the delay, explaining that there was a small mix-up while preparing the venue. The students exchange confused looks, unsure of what he means. The professor calmly asks those nearby to step back so he can place the stairs in that area. Before anyone can fully process his words, he places his hand on the ground. In the next instant, the entire plaza, along with a grand staircase, materializes before their eyes. Shock ripples through the crowd. The professor has just teleported the entire plaza using advanced teleportation magic. Afterward, he grants the students permission to enter and sit wherever they like. Lee takes a seat and guesses that the academy deliberately chose this location so everyone could admire the school's main building during the ceremony. Even so, he cannot hide his amazement at the overwhelming capabilities of the World Union Academy. Nearby, two students are whispering. One wonders why there are so many seats prepared when only 30 students were admitted. The other, a female student, seems surprised he does not know. He apologizes awkwardly, admitting that aside from sword training, he has not studied much. She explains that the World Union Academy gathers the finest students from all over the world. Just as she finishes speaking, a loud rumble echoes across the sky. Aircraft and dragons descend toward the plaza. Among them is the massive magical airship known as the Strato Queen. Even Lee is taken aback. He once boarded the Strato Queen during his time with the Liquidator Subjugation Squad. It is one of the largest airships in existence. Yet the Academy has deployed it solely for an entrance ceremony. The airship lands gracefully, and additional students disembark before taking their seats. Soon after, the ceremony officially begins. The headmaster delivers a formal speech. Despite the Academy's prestige, the structure of the ceremony feels surprisingly ordinary. Lee finds himself fighting off drowsiness. Next, the professor calls the top-ranked students of each course to the stage. Leonhardt, top of the swordsmanship course. The student seated near Lee rises. Some whisper in recognition. He is the one who defeated an examiner instantly during the entrance exam. Rumors even claim that his swordsmanship rivals that of certain professors. Leonhardt steps onto the stage, greets both the professor and the headmaster, and politely asks if he may speak freely. He begins with a proper greeting to his fellow students, expressing his anticipation for the days they will strive together as members of the prestigious World Union Academy. Then his tone shifts. He states that he has a complaint, specifically about a student who does not deserve to be here. Turning toward Professor Ariel, known as the Divine Eye, he asks whether she believes he is mistaken. The question catches her off guard. She calmly responds that all admitted students pass the Academy's rigorous examination, though they may not all match Leonhardt's strength. Leonhardt shakes his head. He clarifies that he is referring to a student she personally admitted through special consideration under the Divine Eye's authority. His voice rises as he demands that the specially admitted student reveal himself, return his uniform, and leave the Academy immediately. Lee feels the tension immediately. He realizes Leonhardt is referring to him. Fortunately, Leonhardt does not know what he looks like. Lee quietly decides not to step forward. Meanwhile, Ariel smiles faintly, remarking that this year's students are certainly spirited. Leonhardt grows visibly frustrated. He insists that this is not a joke and demands that she stop granting admissions through favoritism. In the blink of an eye, Ariel appears behind him. Calmly, she asks whether he truly believes he is stronger than Lee. Leonhardt grits his teeth and confidently declares that he is. With a composed expression, Ariel proposes a wager, placing her position at the Academy and Lee's admission on the line. Leonhardt asks if she intends to make him fight the special admission student, Lee. Ariel casually waves her hand and says she would never do something so reckless. If he were to fight seriously, Leonhardt might end up dead. As an educator, she refuses to put her students' lives at risk. Her response only fuels Leonhardt's anger, but Ariel calmly proposes an alternative, a wager involving monsters instead. It would be far safer, and besides, she knows Leonhardt excels at battling monsters more than humans. Curious, Leonhardt demands the details. Ariel explains the rules simply. Each of them will be assigned a target monster. With every round, the target will grow stronger. Whoever fails to defeat their assigned monster first loses. The stakes are severe. If Lee loses, Ariel will step down from her position as professor, and every special admission student will be expelled. But if Leonhardt loses, he must obey any command she gives. Leonhardt pauses, then insists on hearing the first target before agreeing. Though confident in his strength, he refuses to walk into a hidden trap. After a brief moment of thought, Ariel declares the first target, the Ogre General. The entire room falls silent in shock. Lee wonders why she would specifically choose such a formidable opponent. Even Leonhardt protests, arguing that an Ogre General is not a monster one can defeat alone. In response, Ariel sets the time frame for the challenge to 1 full year. Still, Leonhardt objects. If defeating a disaster-level monster were possible within a single year of preparation, countless past tragedies could have been prevented. He accuses Ariel of deliberately choosing an unbeatable target to force a draw. But Ariel counters firmly. If Lee fails to defeat the Ogre General within a year, she will automatically resign, and the special admission students will be expelled. Leonhardt is stunned. He questions whether she has lost her mind, because from his perspective, the outcome seems predetermined. Seeing no further objections, Ariel prepares to conclude the agreement. Before it is finalized, Leonhardt clarifies one last condition. The Ogre General cannot be weakened or altered in any way. Ariel agrees. With a simple spell, she conjures a pen and drafts a magical contract detailing every term. If Leonhardt has no complaints, all that remains is his signature. After signing, he asks one final question. Does she truly believe that Lee can win? Ariel offers no clear answer and quietly takes her seat. Meanwhile, the other professors begin whispering, suggesting that perhaps she is using this wager as an excuse to step down. Lee exhales deeply, realizing the contract is now official. Yet something feels different. When Ariel set the time frame to a full year, it seemed as though she had factored in the Ogre General Lee defeated before enrolling. In that moment, Lee understands. The outcome of this wager may have been decided from the very beginning. After the ceremony concludes, regular classes officially begin. The professor opens the lecture by covering the fundamentals of magic. Even if some students were introduced to the material on the first day, he reminds them that, as academy students, they cannot afford to waste a single day. Mastery begins with discipline. He starts with the most basic concept of all, how to utilize magic. Within the human body lies an invisible energy known as ether. This energy forms the foundation of all magical techniques. As the explanation continues, Lee prepares himself for difficulty, expecting to struggle. Surprisingly, he keeps up without issue. He already heard the same lecture during boot camp. The real problem isn't the lesson, it's the fact that, out of all the classes available, he ended up in the same one as Leonhardt. Lee silently hopes Leonhardt never discovers that he is this year's Divine I special admission student. Noticing Lee looking away, the professor calls him out and asks him to demonstrate basic magic for the class. Lee respectfully replies that since they are in the swordsmanship course, it should be acceptable if they cannot use magic proficiently. The professor disagrees. Even if they primarily wield swords in real combat, they must understand the fundamentals of magic to coordinate effectively with mages. At the very least, they need to grasp how it feels to control ether. Hearing this, Lee realizes the explanation is identical to the one from boot camp. That can only mean one thing. He asks directly whether they are about to learn the ether bullet spell. The professor looks surprised. He asks if Lee can actually use it. Lee confirms that he can, quietly relieved that the grueling boot camp training was not in vain. Seeing an opportunity, the professor decides to turn the demonstration into a match. Leonhardt, who can also use ether bullet, will face Lee. Leonhardt immediately warns that it could be dangerous for Lee to fight him seriously. However, the professor insists that ether bullet is not lethal under supervision, and he makes it clear that he will not ask Leonhardt to hold back. Then, as if to provoke Leonhardt further, the professor reveals Lee's identity. He is this year's Divine I student. The atmosphere shifts instantly. Leonhardt's expression hardens, and he tells Lee to step forward. The two stand on stage, waiting for the signal. At the professor's command, they will fire their ether bullets at one another. Lee has only trained in magic for a few days at boot camp. Even if the professor claims no one will die, it is obvious he may not walk away unharmed. Across from him, Leonhardt calmly forms his ether bullet, determined to demonstrate the overwhelming gap in their abilities. Seeing Leonhardt's intent, Lee understands he cannot afford to hold back. But in the next moment, the entire class is stunned. Leonhardt's ether bullet is small and compact, while Lee's is massive, dense, and radiating overwhelming pressure. Leonhardt freezes when he sees the sheer size of Lee's ether bullet. At the last possible moment, the professor steps in and deploys a defensive barrier to protect him. However, even the professor's barrier struggles to withstand the impact for long. The force of the collision sends Leonhardt flying backward, and the shockwave makes it difficult for the surrounding students to even keep their eyes open. The professor immediately rushes to Leonhardt's side to check on him. Fortunately, he is unharmed. Still, the professor is deeply shaken. If he had not intervened in time, that single ether bullet could have been fatal. Even among the Academy's professors, no one can cast an ether bullet of that magnitude. Turning to Lee, the professor demands to know what he just did. Lee looks down at his hand, wondering if he somehow used a different version of the ether bullet than the one taught at the World Union Academy. The professor quickly clarifies that Lee did use the correct spell, but the quality was entirely different. What Lee produced was not ordinary ether. It was super-compressed ether. The professor explains that generating super-compressed ether is something even experienced faculty members struggle to achieve. Yet Lee not only produced it in an instant, he reformed it into a stable spell. In fact, he is currently the only student in the Academy capable of doing so. Even for the professor, it was the first time witnessing an ether bullet of that power. In that moment, the professor finally understands why Lee was admitted as the Divine Eye Special student. But Lee thinks otherwise. According to him, every spell taught to the subjugation squad during boot camp was performed like this. Compared to the others there, he considered himself one of the least talented. To prove his point, he casually forms another ether bullet and remarks that anyone could do it with proper practice. The professor bursts into laughter, leaving Lee confused. Then comes an unexpected suggestion. The professor advises Lee to transfer to the magic course, insisting that his talent for magic far surpasses his aptitude for swordsmanship. Lee immediately refuses. Looking at his right hand, he quietly repeats what he was once told, that he simply is not very good at magic. The professor does not believe that for a second. By the Academy's standards, he calls Lee an unparalleled prodigy. The other students are stunned. This is a professor who rarely offers praise, yet he is speaking with open admiration. Still, Lee declines the offer. The professor even goes so far as to say it would be a loss to the world if Lee did not properly study magic. Almost a crime against magic itself. Lee smiles at the dramatic wording, but his thoughts drift elsewhere. In his previous life, he trained under a group of women who explained the concept of OD, also known as mana. In ancient times, people were unaware of OD's existence. As a result, casting refined magic was extremely difficult. Practitioners had to repeatedly compress ether within their bodies, hoping to gather and utilize the small portions that happened to mix with OD by chance. With that memory resurfacing, Lee asks the professor if he knows about OD. The answer is no. People of this era have no knowledge of it. That realization sends a chill through Lee. The techniques he learned in the subjugation squad were knowledge from the future. From now on, he must be careful about who he shares this information with. Once again, the professor asks if Lee will reconsider transferring to the magic course. With full respect, Lee declines. The professor finally relents, though not completely. He tells Lee to visit him anytime he changes his mind. For now, he allows Lee to do as he pleases during class, acknowledging that the current lectures are far too basic for him. The students remain in awe of Professor Carlos' reaction. Even Leonhardt, who had openly despised Lee moments ago, now looks at him differently. The sudden shift in attitude sends a chill down Lee's spine. After class ends, Lee is unexpectedly summoned by Professor Ariel. He makes his way to her office. As soon as he pushes it open, a girl suddenly lunges at him. Acting on instinct, Lee blocks the attack. The girl loses her balance and falls to the ground. The moment he sees her face, Lee immediately recognizes who she is. Professor Ariel leans back in her chair and openly compliments Leo's performance. Two other professors are standing in the office, and one of them questions her directly. He asks whether she instructed Bella to go easy on Leo. Bella's movements were flawless, yet her sword was knocked away far too easily. It looked unnatural. The moment Leo hears the name Bella, his suspicions are confirmed. She is the sorceress he had been thinking of. Professor Ariel immediately mocks the two professors for failing to recognize the truth. Bella was not holding back at all. The bearded professor then comments on the earlier exchange. He agrees with Ariel's assessment. It looked as though Leo deliberately avoided using his dominant arm, almost as if he were protecting his arm. The professors begin to speculate that this may be due to an injury. However, they clarify that it does not appear to be a simple muscular issue. From their perspective, it seems like something deeper, an internal wound of a more serious nature. Leo is startled. The fact that they could deduce so much from a brief exchange leaves him speechless. The professors boast lightly about their experience, but Ariel eventually dismisses them, stating that she has no intention of giving up on her student. As they leave, they admit that Leo clearly has potential. Still, they warn that if his wound does not heal, it could ultimately mean he fails to meet the Academy's admission standards. Once they are alone, Ariel shifts the conversation to magic. The two sit down on the sofa, and she immediately brings up the super compressed ether Leo used during Professor Carlos' class. Carlos had already visited her office, requesting that Leo be transferred to the magic course. She refused. In her opinion, Leo is better suited to the sword than to magic. At the very least, Ariel points out something curious. Leo does not look like someone skilled in ether compression. He shows no visible signs of having practiced it extensively. Leo is stunned by her accuracy. Realizing there is no point in pretending, he admits that she is correct. Ariel leans forward and asks him directly what kind of trick he used. She promises not to reveal it to anyone and even offers him a reward in exchange for the truth. More than anything, she wants to know for Bella's sake. When Leo asks for clarification, he nearly slips and refers to Bella as a sorceress. Ariel explains that Bella is considered a genius in magic theory, but when it comes to actual application, she struggles. For reasons unknown, she cannot properly execute ether compression, which prevents her from producing super compressed ether. Hearing that, Leo finally understands. So that is why Bella was known as a late bloomer. Professor Ariel presses Leo for the truth because she learned something unusual from Professor Carlos. According to him, Leo never actually compressed ether at all. That is why she wants to understand how he created super compressed ether without physically compressing it. If Bella can master that method, she will not be sent to Professor Varian Bradley. The moment Leo hears that name, his expression darkens. He knows exactly who Professor Varian Bradley is. Bradley is infamous, a man remembered as history's worst magic criminal. He conducted countless experiments, and many lives were lost as a result. On top of that, several magical disasters were linked to his actions. Leo realizes that in this time period, Bradley has not yet been captured. Professor Ariel reveals the harsh truth. If Bella cannot produce super compressed ether by the end of the year, she will be sent to Bradley for a procedure. Leo is immediately alarmed, insisting that it is a terrible idea. Ariel agrees. Although the surgery is presented as a way to enhance magical ability, but Ariel doesn't trust Bradley. The details have never been made public, but rumors suggest that some people have died. Bella may be talented, but if she fails to master super compressed ether, she will either be expelled or worse. Ariel admits that she would rather see Bella leave the academy than allow that man to lay a hand on her. Leo falls silent, deep in thought. The magic he possesses is knowledge from the future, knowledge that does not yet exist in this era. If he reveals it, he risks changing the course of history. But when he sees Bella's fear and remembers the grim future that awaits, he decides something important. Perhaps that future is better off changed. With that resolve, Leo agrees to teach them how to produce super compressed ether. Soon after, they head to the arena. There, Leo carefully explains everything he knows about magic, including the concept of OD and the true structure behind ether manipulation. He makes one thing absolutely clear: they must never reveal that he taught them this. They cannot disclose it even if they wanted to. A magical contract binds them, and breaking it would cost them their lives. When Leo finishes, he asks for their honest opinions. Professor Ariel is stunned. Simply learning about OD alone reshapes her understanding of magic. But the deeper theory Leo explains goes far beyond that. Listening to him feels like attending a lecture from centuries into the future. Bella's eyes shine with excitement. She tells Leo that just hearing his explanation could advance the history of magic by 100 years. Ironically, it is her own future lecture he is repeating. There is still much that Ariel cannot fully evaluate. So she turns to Bella and asks whether she believes Leo's theory is correct. Bella nods. Nothing he said contradicts the current magical framework. In fact, it strengthens it. The fastest way to confirm it is simple: test it. That is why they are standing in the arena. Bella hands Leo a sheet of calculations and explains that if everything he said is true, the spell written there should function with far greater efficiency. Then she prepares to demonstrate her full power according to the revised formula. Leo recalls the rumors about Bella's true strength. At her peak, she is said to possess enough firepower to burn down an entire city. The problem is not power. It is control. Bella's massive wave of fire surges toward Leo. At the last possible moment, she regains control. If she had been even a second slower, Leo might not have walked away unharmed. Bella beams with excitement. Successfully controlling that level of power feels exhilarating to her. But the joy doesn't last long. Having exhausted all her ether, she suddenly collapses. Leo rushes forward in alarm, but Professor Ariel calmly stops him. Bella has not been injured. She simply fell asleep after completely draining her ether reserves. Relieved, Leo lets out a quiet breath. Professor Ariel praises Bella's extraordinary performance. She never imagined Bella could construct magic on that scale in such a short time. Even while dozing, Bella murmurs that it is all thanks to Leo's remarkable theory, which allowed her to produce super-compressed ether with ease. Now, she will not have to undergo the dangerous procedure. Ariel admits she is grateful they avoided it, especially because Bella did not lose control of her magic in the process. Leo looks confused, so Ariel explains further. Professor Bradley's procedure can increase magical output, but it comes at the cost of control. The exact mechanism remains secret, but it appears to forcibly break a person's natural limiter. Hearing that, Leo finally understands why the sorceress Bella in the future struggled to control her overwhelming power. With Bella now capable of producing super-compressed ether, the terms of their magical contract have been fulfilled. It is Ariel's turn to uphold her promise. She begins by treating Leo's injured arm with nerve restoration magic. After the spell takes effect, Leo cautiously moves his fingers. He can move them again, but something feels different. The motion lacks the smooth precision he once had. To confirm, Ariel asks him to swing a sword. Leo does so, but the imbalance becomes obvious. His arm responds, yet it does not move the way it used to. Ariel had already anticipated this outcome. While she repaired the nerves, she explains, her magic cannot heal a wound to the soul. Leo is startled. He does not fully understand. Ariel calmly elaborates. Modern magical theory has not officially proven the existence of the soul, but she believes in it. More than that, she can see it. She removes her glasses, revealing irises unlike anything ordinary. With her unique vision, she can observe the state of Leo's soul. Even now, she says, it is slowly recovering. As long as he does not overexert himself, it will continue to heal naturally. Leo asks if that means he should stop practicing swordsmanship. Ariel shakes her head. He may train normally. Instead, she asks a different question. What kind of swordsmanship could possibly wound someone's soul like that? Leo tenses. Ariel offers an example, a sword art that moves the blade using the power of the soul itself. The style of Amy White. She studies Leo carefully and suggests that he might know her. Leo is thrown into confusion. In this era, they should not even be connected yet. Seeing his reaction, Ariel questions her assumption. She suspects Leo learned swordsmanship from Amy White, but after reconsidering, she notices subtle differences. The person who trained Leo seems slightly more skilled than Amy at this point in time, though in a few years, Amy would likely reach that level. Leo is stunned by Ariel's perceptiveness. He quickly lies, claiming he learned swordsmanship at a dojo in his hometown. He must redirect the conversation before he reveals too much. He asks whether swordsmanship can truly damage the soul. Ariel answers firmly, no ordinary technique could do that. After all, there is no ordinary swordsmanship capable of defeating an ogre general in a single strike, while simultaneously defeating the surrounding ogres as well. Leo freezes. It turns out Ariel already knew about that incident. She examined the remains left at the scene, and the destruction was extraordinary. And that is not all. Ariel also sensed the mysterious power Leo used that day. She can see it, leaking faintly through what she describes as a chained door within him. Hearing this, Leo begins to trust her more. This is not something one could guess. She truly can see the soul. Ariel then reveals that she has seen a similar presence before. She does not believe it is exactly the same, but it carries a similar aura. Leo presses her for clarification. She confirms the resemblance, though she is uncertain whether what she saw before was even human. Then she mentions a name that sends a chill down Leo's spine. The Liquidator. The moment she says it, Leo's reaction confirms that he recognizes the name. But what unsettles him even more is this. Why is that name being spoken in this time period at all?